This is Jim Cornette, wrestling legend and all-around nice guy. You are listening to WGD, Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly with Steve and the Scum. I recommend this program highly, especially if you have nothing better to do.
Hey there, all you savages. Welcome back to Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly podcast, WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. My name is Steve. Back alongside me after a hard-earned vacation is everyone's beacon of truth, justice, in the American way, and that is the Scum. Glad to have him back. Hall of Fame month keeps rolling on here. We got Ted Dibiase, the $1 Million Man, Mid-South legend. Can't wait to have him on. He's one of the Scum's favorite guys ever. Great to have you back, Scum. What's going on, my brother?
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much. I guess Hall of Fame week, a good time to come back from vacation. I guess you could call me an armchair Hall of Famer, so to speak. But always great to be back here with you, my longtime tag team partner, Steve. Always a pleasure to be doing business with the guys over at Wrestling's Glory Days on Facebook. And you can speak for me when we talk the $1 Million Man, when we talk Ted Dibiase today. All things from his great storied career back in the NWA days, all over the territories, right through the WWF. Very special show for me, Steve. One of my all-time favorites. So it'll be tough to keep it together and not let the little Scum in me run wild, so to speak.
Little Scum within. Well, he's back, folks, that's for sure. Hey, listen, everybody, thanks again for tuning in. If you've never tuned into our show before, we just wanted to say a quick thank you. Always going to focus on the best in classic pro wrestling on this program. We never talk any current product. We don't give you any spoilers. All of our guests are guys that you can remember from the glory days of professional wrestling. Well, I know, Scum, we had a busy week when you came back from vacation, got right back to work on our show, and got some good news as of the early part of this week. So why don't you go ahead and share for our listeners what you dug up. I know you worked real hard on this and facilitated this deal, so give our listeners a little bit of information as to what's going on with our show.
Well, again, not too much to be said right now, but it would appear as though the claims and the statements that have been being made about Steve and the Scum going worldwide could have a little fruition to it. We are in the works right now of possibly joining on with what would be a huge, huge boost to the show with a major wrestling site to their soon-to-be up-and-running radio network, and we're just really thrilled about it. I mean, it's humbling somewhat. We appreciate everybody calling in, or listening in, excuse me, and from a couple of guys that grew up watching wrestling together and talking wrestling that decided to give this a whirl and do it the right way and stick to the way that we wanted to do it and not bury people and take the high road, so to speak, which we always try to do for just a few short months to have this kind of exposure and have this kind of steam, so to speak, pushing the train. I think that you would agree with me, Steve. It's somewhat overwhelming, but at least we're enjoying the ride, right, pal?
Oh, absolutely, Scum. You said it best, man. And, more details to come on this, but I'm very excited about this new venture. I'm very excited about our guest tonight, Ted Dibiase. Another guy in the line of 3 Hall of Famers in a row, Scum. That's pretty sweet. WWE Hall of Famers, Hall of Fame month here at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. Kicked it off with Road Warrior Animal, talking all things Hawk. Ooh, Mercy Daddy Jimmy Valiant was certainly entertaining. Found out that he's huge fans of ours, so that's pretty cool. And now we have Ted Dibiase, the $1 Million Man, legend of Mid-South Wrestling. Guy's one of the best heels ever. Really, really excited about that. Scum, I'll tell you, man, I don't have much more to say. I just want to get right down to this interview. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward. I'm on pins and needles here waiting for that phone to light up. I'm just wondering whether it's going to light up from Omaha, Nebraska, or his summer residence in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, or maybe Antigua in the West Indies. And I certainly, Steve, I know that we do this out of the goodness of our heart, not of being big wrestling fans. But hey, I don't know exactly what Ted is up to these days per se, all the time. But I know that my price tag is pretty low. So if he's looking for it, certainly the Scum can be bought and paid for.
Yeah, me too. Super cheap. You probably have it on you. I've seen food stamps cost more money. Anyway, Scum, you don't have to wait any longer. That red light is lit up. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have Ted Dibiase with us now. So without further ado, let's go right to him. $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase.
All right, folks, it's that moment you've all been waiting for here at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. We got the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase, with us today. Ted, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, fellas. How are you?
All right. Well, let's go back to West Texas State University. It seems to be a breeding ground for some very legendary professional wrestlers, including yourself. So if you could bring us back to West Texas State and fill our listeners in on which stars that would become later, more familiar with in the squared circle, you became familiar with them there. So tell us how your football days there started out and how you eventually transitioned from the football field onto the wrestling ring.
Well, the influence in that area, the reason that there are so many guys that came out of West Texas State into professional wrestling was that, it was the home of one of the most famous wrestling families in wrestling history, the Funk family. Dory Funk Sr., Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk. I wrestled, or I should say my dad wrestled in that area. That was one of the best places that he ever wrestled in terms of doing good business and making good money for his time and his era. But there's I tell people that all the time. And there's probably been more professional wrestlers, big name professional wrestlers, come out of West Texas State than football players. But I mean, let me try to let me see. The Funks, Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk, Dick Murdoch, Dusty Rhodes, myself, Tully Blanchard, and Tito Santana, whose real name is Merced Solis. We were all on the same team.
Wow.
And then a guy named Bobby Duncombe, Bruiser Brody. Let's see, after us was Kelly Kaninsky, who didn't stay in the business, but he did wrestle. Barry Windham, Manny Fernandez. It's just crazy, the number of guys that came out of West Texas State. My father had a heart attack and died in the ring in 1969 in that territory in Lubbock, Texas. I went back to southern Arizona, finished high school in a very small town, had signed a scholarship to play football at the University of Arizona, and then wrestling comes on television one day. I'm just watching TV, and here's the wrestling show, but it's the tape out of Amarillo, and they're coming to Tucson. So I went down to Tucson to see the Funks, who I hadn't seen in 3 years since my father's death. And Terry Funk talked me into taking a recruiting trip back to West Texas State, and that's all it took. I mean, I got back around people that I knew and I loved. And the other thing is that I was smart enough to know that coming out of a very small school that I really had to work hard to get that scholarship, and that I might not be NFL material, and as it turned out, I wasn't. I remember one day the coach told me, he said, Ted, they said, you've got a lot of, matter of fact, they moved me from a defensive lineman to an offensive lineman, because one day the coach looked at me, he says, Dibiase, he says, you got more heart on it than anybody on the team. He says, but we're going to have to start timing you with a sundial. So they moved me from defense to offense, gave me the benefit of the snap count and an assignment, so... But those were my beginnings, and I, again, Terry Funk still lives there. Actually, my oldest son is living in Amarillo right now. But a lot of memories there.
That is fantastic stuff. So, being a second generation performer, along with working alongside some of the legendary guys at West Texas State, was it just kind of a natural transition for you to just hop in the ring thereafter, or did you hook up with some guys and did some training and a little bit more of the territorial stuff?
Well, I mean, while I was at West Texas, I got a phone call one day. It was Terry Funk, and he said, Ted, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm just watching a little TV right now. And he said, do you have a pair of white or black blue jeans? I said, yeah. He says, okay, well, I'll be at your house in 10 minutes. You're the referee tonight in Lubbock. What? I said, we don't have a referee. And so, and here's what's ironic, and it didn't hit me until I was actually standing in the ring. I stepped into the ring in Lubbock, Texas, and it's the first time that I ever got into a ring in front of a crowd, and at a paid wrestling event. And it was in that very building, in that very ring, 3 years earlier, that my father had lost his life. And looking back at that, I didn't realize it, but it's almost like I stepped in and took over exactly where he left off. And, that's kind of a side note, just something personal to me. It just happened to happen that way. But so I spent the upcoming summer as a result of that one night. Rather than go to do a regular summer job, I had roofed houses and I had done all this other stuff. I worked as a referee for the Amarillo territory, and it was a tremendous education because I was in the ring every night, and back then there was only one referee. So the referee is the referee for the night. If there's 6 matches or 7 matches on the card, he's the guy that's in the ring from the beginning to the end. And so I was exposed to a lot of great talent at a very early, very young. And, of course, I had a natural instinct for the business because I grew up in it and I loved it my entire life. So, but I learned a lot about the psychology of wrestling, being a referee. A good referee is always at the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the right time. But that was the beginning of it. And then at the end of my junior year of college, Dick Murdoch, he just made a suggestion. He was going to what became Mid-South Wrestling, the Mid-South Territory, which at the time that he went, and when I first started there myself, it was promoted by Bill Watts and Leroy McGurk. Later, Bill Watts would buy Leroy McGurk out, and it would be his operation. And so he said, why don't you come to down here to the South this summer and get your feet wet and see if you really want to do this. And so it was like June, late May or early June of 1975. I went down and in Shreveport, Louisiana, I had my first television match with Danny Hodge, and that was when it started. And at the end of the summer, I had a year of school left, or I thought I did. Maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. I kind of regret it now, but things went so well that summer that I didn't go back. I had 1 year of school left. I would have had a degree in education, but I was so enthralled with wrestling, and I was doing so well and making money that I just said I'm not gonna go back, and I didn't. And so I went from Mid-South to actually I was there for another year. Then I did go back to Texas to wrestle out of Amarillo, and then I went to Kansas City for a short period of time, back to Amarillo, and then in 1979 I went to New York from Texas the first time. The first time I wrestled it was the WWF then, and Vince McMahon Sr. was still the boss, and Vince Jr. was the ring announcer. And actually Tito Santana and I went together. That's where he became Tito Santana. They gave him that name, and I was only there about 9 months, and then I left and I went back to Mid-South, and again Mid-South, then to Georgia, back to Mid-South. The better part of the first 12 years of my career I spent in Mid-South, because I'm going to tell you, I didn't realize when I went there the first time, but Bill Watts is one of the greatest minds this business has ever had. He tutored under Eddie Graham, who's regarded by many as the very best, and a lot of guys tutored under Eddie Graham. But his psychology of the business is incredible, and I give him a lot of credit for the my knowledge of the business and becoming the worker that I did. And of course, a lot of that was that I was exposed to a lot of really, really great talent. at a very young age, and so again, 79, December of 79. My last match in the WWF was in Madison Square Garden with a young guy nobody ever heard of, except that they'd seen him in a movie as Thunder Lips, and his name was Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan had his first match in Madison Square Garden with me, and I was the babyface, and he was the heel. And then I left, and again, I didn't go back to the WWF until '87. So, of course, that was the territorial days, and that's the way business was then.
Certainly, and some great foreshadowing there with you and Hulk Hogan in the ring at Madison Square Garden. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about that time in Mid-South territory. During mid to late 70s, like you were talking about, you gained some great experience, and there are a ton of guys out of the Mid-South territory that went on to just have stellar careers if they weren't already in the middle of a stellar career. Two guys that come to mind, Dick Slater, and a guy that you had mentioned now a couple of times who is a favorite of our show. Both myself and the Scum are huge fans. We're huge fans of Dick Murdoch. So if you could, tell us, take us through that time frame where you were swapping the Missouri State title from Dick Slater to yourself to Dick Murdoch, and give us a little bit of a history on how important that title is. A lot of folks today, if they didn't follow wrestling back, into the 70s, early 80s, the Missouri State Championship was a very prestigious title, and of course yourself taking it off the hands of Dick Slater, and then Dick Murdoch taking it from you. Tell us a little bit about both of those performers in detail, and talk to us a little bit about the relevance of that Missouri State Championship, if you could, please.
I sure will. Number one, Dick Murdoch is one of those guys who very near and dear to me. I miss Dick Murdoch tremendously. Dick Murdoch was one of the best wrestlers that I've ever seen, and Dick is just like, I liken Dick Murdoch to, a Dennis the Menace. Dick was so talented, but he was a funny guy. I mean, sometimes he would rather entertain the boys in the back than entertain the crowd. So he would do these goofy things in the ring, but he could do it and get away with it. I mean, he could do it and incorporate it into the match. I mean, I have seen him do things. I mean, he could be having the most serious match and having the people that are watching the match ready to come in the ring and riot, and he's in the ring cutting jokes. And it was just, he would mimic the Three Stooges. It was just incredible. And I really believe that the only reason that Dick Murdoch was never an NWA World Champion was for that very reason. I mean, he had the talent. I mean, he could do it. I mean, he could do it like, it was like with no effort. And but because the promoters were always, they were always concerned about which Murdoch was going to show up. And but tremendous talent. And again, the Missouri State title, like you said, was a very prestigious title. And St. Louis was like a one-city territory. If you went to St. Louis, and the talent that came to St. Louis came from all the territories. So it's kind of like if you came to St. Louis and you got over in St. Louis and you were pushed in St. Louis, it puts your name on the map. And the Missouri State title, for most part, most of the guys that were Missouri State champions became NWA World Champions. All, of course, except me and Murdoch. But and Dick Slater. It's funny, it's fate. I mean, when I went and did TV in St. Louis the first time, I was actually wrestling in the Kansas City territory, and they liked what they saw and everything, but I didn't really get the big. It was almost like, even though St. Louis was Sam Mushnick, but it was also Pat O'Connor and Harley Race and I'm brain dead. Oh my gosh, the promoter of Kansas City is give me a minute now. Bob Geigel. Yeah, and so those guys were all partners, and so I didn't actually get a push in St. Louis until I left Kansas City, and it was one of those fateful things. The night that I got the Missouri title from Dick Slater was, I think it was because Murdoch either missed a flight, there was a cancellation, something happened, he wasn't there, and they had to do something because Slater wasn't coming back. And so they had Slater drop the belt to me. And that was like the beginning, because, I mean, you know, they had eyes on me anyway, but it was just like, it really wasn't supposed to happen at that time. And so I ended up with the title. And then I dropped the belt to Murdoch, and that was the beginning of it. And I tell everybody that the first major main event of my life was at the Kiel Auditorium with Harley Race when he was the NWA World Champion, and it was the first time I wrestled in front of a sellout crowd, and it was in the Kiel, and what we had done is we had actually had a television match where, in a tag team match, it was actually me and Paul Orndorff wrestled Harley Race and Bulldog Bob Brown in a tag team match. And I pinned Harley in the tag match, and the announcer, the guy's name was Mickey Garagiola, was so excited. He said, "We have a new world champion. We have a new world champion." And then so we, corrected him. He said, "No, he's a new world champion. He's just beat the world champion, but it's tag team match." But that was the lead-in for me having that first title match with Harley, and that was what put me on the map. That's when, and back then, again, this is before nationally televised wrestling shows, and the only way that you got national exposure were the wrestling magazines. And, of course, they're always there. So that's kind of what put me on the map. And that was, like a precursor to my going to the WWF. And but, again, Dick Murdoch is one of those guys. Another guy that I had the opportunity to work with was somebody that Murdoch idolized, and that was Killer Carl Cox. Tremendous heel. Unbelievable psychology. I mean, Carl Cox could get more out of a match, and more. It's kind of like you've heard that old saying, less is more. It's not about how much stuff you do; it's the timing of what you do, and his timing was impeccable. But and again, it's Dick Slater. Dick Slater was a friend. Dick Slater and I became close because of our mutual friendship with Terry Funk. Now, Terry and I look at Terry like a brother. I've known Terry Funk since I was a little kid. I mean, his dad, Dory Sr., and my father were very, very good friends. And Slater so liked Terry Funk that it's like the first time I ever met Slater was in Japan. Terry Funk wasn't there, and when I had a match with him, and I thought I was in the ring with Terry Funk. I mean, because he mimicked Terry Funk's style, just almost completely. And but again, an impeccable pro. And I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Sure did. It's, you're not the only one that we've spoken with that talked as you did about Dick Murdoch. We recently had Jim Cornette on, and he had very similar things to say about Murdoch being one of the best talents that he ever had a chance and a pleasure to work with. So
absolutely,
that's becoming a common thread around here. So next, chronologically moving along here, the next step in your career was one that was very near and dear to myself and Steve as growing up, watching on the Superstation. We were big fans of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Personally, one of my first memories of a great feud in wrestling was when you split your short-lived team with Wildfire Tommy Rich down there. And I remember the Loser Leaves Town match and the masked Mr. R and Brad Armstrong being under the mask. What are your memories of working there in Atlanta with Tommy and that feud specifically? And also, who or what were some of your other fond memories of your time there in Georgia Championship Wrestling? Including, if you wouldn't mind speaking to it, the origins of the controversial black glove that you used to wear there.
Well, it was funny is that the angle you're talking about, where we do the loser leave town match, and obviously everybody expects me to get beat, and Tommy gets beat, and he has to leave. And then the next week he shows up on TV with a mask on, and of course the blonde hair is hanging out underneath the mask, and Tommy talked like there's no mistaking his voice. It was just hilarious because I'm screaming and yelling, "Hey, it's Tommy Rich!" I mean, you idiots know it's Tommy Rich, da 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 da. And actually, we actually had a match, and during the match, I threw him out on the floor, and I picked him up. And thank goodness that it was a tag team match. The referee was on the other side of the ring, and I went to throw him in. When I went to throw him in, the mask came off of his head. And so I just I said, Tommy hit me, so he hits me. He grabs the mask and puts it back on, and afterwards I said, tie that thing on, man. I said, we don't need that happening, because if the mask comes off, everybody, including the referee, sees it. The angle's over. But it was actually an angle that was copied from something that I did with Junkyard Dog in Mid-South. In Mid-South, we did the same angle, and loser leave town, and JYD loses, and the next week he shows up with the mask on as Stagger Lee. Again, it was the same. It was an angle that was taken from something that we had done in Mid-South. But when I went to Atlanta the first time, this was when I was being considered for the NWA World Title. I got a call from Terry Funk, and he said that there had been like Terry Funk, Harley Race, his brother, Bob Geigel. These are guys that all were had a lot of say so in the NWA. I mean, Bob Geigel was the president of the NWA, and what they told me was that what they were thinking about doing was this. That they would put the belt on a guy, and that champion would usually carry the belt for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then they would take it off of him and they put it on somebody else. And of course, he would travel all of the United States and wherever the NWA World Title was recognized, or what territories were affiliated with NWA. And they said, we want to mix it up a little bit. Instead of leaving it on one guy for so long, we're thinking about maybe picking 3 guys and kind of do like over the course of a period of time, we'll switch it back and forth, and between these 2 or 3 fellas, and the 3 names were Ted DiBiase, Ric Flair, and Dusty Rhodes. And so when I went to Atlanta, I was told to get on the TV and get over. And because at the time, the Superstation was the only cable network, the original cable network, and it was the only nationally televised wrestling show in the country. And of course, this is back when cable was relatively new, and everybody has cable now, but that wasn't true back then. So, but when I get to Atlanta, Atlanta, prior to my arriving, had been a hot territory. I mean, they had been doing some killer business, and I show up, and Ole Anderson gets mad and quits, and he leaves, and it's like it's like you talk about timing. And then Jim Barnett, who owned the territory, ran the territory, he was the guy. He brought in Robert Fuller to be the booker. Well, I got nothing against Robert, but who everybody in the WWF would remember as Colonel Tom Parker. But Robert was not a great booker. Now, he and his brother had been down in Dothan, Alabama, and the Pensacola area had done tremendous business. But I don't think it was because of Robert's booking ability, and I'm just being nice. So I went, I'm supposed to get over. Barnett says, get Ted Dibiase over because he's in line to possibly be an NWA champion soon. So Robert, to get me over, puts me in a tag combination with himself. So I think you get the picture here.
Right.
And so I was still going back and forth to St. Louis, and I'm a young guy, and I go to St. Louis, and Sam Mushnick says, "Hey Ted, how's Atlanta?" And I said, "Well, to be honest with you, Sam," I said, I don't know what they're thinking about." And I said, they've hired Robert Fuller to book, and I said, "I'm sorry, but Robert Fuller is high half of the time and couldn't find his butt with both hands." And of course, that goes straight back to Jim Barnett from Sam Mushnick, and so I am really in. Now I got heat from Barnett. He's mad because I guess I made him look like an idiot, and so actually that was when Tommy came back. Because at the time when I first went to Atlanta, Tommy wasn't there. So that's when Tommy comes back, and I'll be honest with you, I think at that point Jim would just as soon have gotten rid of me, except that all these other people wanted me there, and so the next booker that comes in was Buck Robley. Now Buck Robley was a protege of Bill Watts, and Buck, despite all of his vices, really knows the business, and Buck saved me, and Buck saved me from just total disaster by the angle that was shot between me and the Freebirds when they dropped me on my head on the concrete floor, and I went to the hospital, and I stayed in the hospital for like 4 days, and then I was out for a month, and I make the big comeback, and that really salvaged me there. But in terms of the NWA title, I went back to Mid-South, and I kept going back to Mid-South because business was always good there, and Bill Watts did business right. And I guess I was spoiled by that. And Bill Watts finally just pulled out of the NWA. It was like, I don't need the NWA or the NWA champion to be successful here. So, and of course, I'm there for the better part of the first 12 years of my career. So I don't know where the decision was made or why that I was out of the loop. I know that it was said that the first time that Flair got the title, it was like, again, this was just hearsay. They said, they put the title on Flair because Jimmy Crockett said that, it was the only way he could get his money back because he'd been paying for Flair's income tax and his bills, and he said the only way I can get my money back is making him the world champion. But and that's no discredit to Rick's ability. It was just like, let's get it on him right now. And then it went to Dusty, and I actually had a match. The first time Dusty Rhodes ever defended the NWA World Title in Atlanta, he had a match with me. And I remember sitting down with Dusty, and he said, kid, he says, a lot of these people think I can't do this. They think of me and the Gimmick and the big fat guy and da-da-da. He says, let's go out there and show them. And we went out there, and we had nearly a 50-minute match. And it was really good. I mean, a lot of people don't realize Dusty Rhodes was really good. I mean, Dusty wasn't always the big heavy-set guy, but Dusty was such a colorful character that eventually he didn't need to do a lot. And again, if I'd have been smarter, maybe I would have been more character and less bouncing around the ring, and maybe I wouldn't have brand new knees and have had 2 surgeries on my neck by now. But anyway, that was kind of my story of almost having the NWA World Title, and it just didn't happen. And of course, being with Watts most of the time, not even part of the NWA. It's kind of like I just kind of faded out there for a while.
Sure. Well, again, little foreshadowing you're doing here, because the next place I was going was a couple of names that when you did go back to the Mid-South, that, again, the classic feuds, you've had a million of them, it seems, but a couple that specifically come to my mind, you mentioned one of them was where that gimmick came from with the Mr. R under the mask, Junkyard Dog, and the other would be Jim Duggan. Just keeping in that theme that I was talking about, what was it like working at that point in time down in Louisiana in that territory with the hugely popular JYD and the more unorthodox Duggan, who you had tons of different matches? I mean, pretty much every gimmick match that you could think of. And what were your memories of those Hall of Famers in and out of the ring there?
Well, it was great. I mean, I can still remember when I went back there in '84. I left Atlanta. I went back there in '84, and this was, and actually, this was right when Vince was starting to make his move. We did a television in Atlanta, and in walks Pat Patterson, and they get all the guys together, and Pat makes this big announcement of what's about to happen, that the WWF was now going to have its show on TBS. Well, as we all know, that's not what ended up happening, because Vince and Turner got into the big deal. Vince just wanted to give him he wanted to use the network, and Turner wanted his own show. But anyway, I remember Pat saying to the guys there, he said, "No, I don't want any of you to worry. Everybody's got a job. Nobody's losing their job. And I got Pat off to the side, and I said, Pat, I said, look. I said, with all due respect, and I said, you and I know each other a long time. He was there, when I first went to the WWF, and we were friends. I had one of the best matches I ever had in the Garden with Pat Patterson. And I said, Pat, you and I both know there's a difference between having a job and having a position. And I said, right now, I know that you guys have your key guys, in position. So I think I'm going to go back to Mid-South, and I'm going to wait for a better time. And so I went back to Mid-South in '84, and I remember that Ernie Ladd would. I remember Ernie telling me, he said, "You know what? You need to be looking around, because we need a heel." Guys were starting to leave Mid-South. I think Jake had gone up there, and I think the Samoans had gone up to New York, and Paul Orndorff had gone to New York, and he said, we need a heel for you and JYD to work with, because JYD and I were the 2 top baby faces. And so I used to tease the dog all the time. I said, you know what, man, because he and I were really good friends. And I said, this is just not fair. I said, he goes, what? I said, well, your music plays, and you push that wheelbarrow out to the ring, shaking your butt, and you get up on the apron and you howl at the moon, and you have about a 5 or 6 or 7 minute match. It's over, and you're making all the money. And he would just laugh. And so I said, I'm going out there 20, 30, 40 minutes a night. And so Ernie Ladd was looking for Bill. And he said, you're the only one that travels out of the territory, because I was still going back and forth to St. Louis. I was going to Japan once a year, and he said, so be looking around. So I remember going to the hotel where Ernie was staying in Shreveport, knocking on his door, and I said, Ernie, I got you heel. And he says, really? I said, yes, absolutely. And he says, who? And I said, you're looking at him. And I remember he took 2 steps back, and his eyes got real wide. And he just got this big grin on his face, and he said, you rascal, you. He said, that is brilliant. And when he said that, I went, really? Like, you really think it's a great idea? And he said, absolutely, because I had been a baby face for so long. Who would ever? And so we, that's when we did the angle where actually, and that's what was so smart about Watts is like he would plant seeds in the minds of the people. Just it's kind of like we did a deal where I somebody ducks and I hit the ring post and I break my wrist. And so we put a cast on my arm, and I wear a cast on my arm for like 3 or 4 weeks, and I work with the cast, and everybody sees the cast, and then the cast is gone, and that's how far ahead we planned this. And then I take the cast off, and I've got this black glove on my hand, and so the commentary is like, well, Dibiase still, obviously the cast is gone, but the black glove, is just protecting his hand, which is, anyway. So it's just you're planting a seed to be drawn on later. So then we have this match. The angle was we had the match. They made up the story. We're gonna have the fans write in and decide who they want to see in a title match for the North American Heavyweight title. And of course, it ends up being me and JYD, and we're both baby faces, and we cut the real babyface interviews. You know what? We're friends, but business is business. And when we climb in the ring, it's like going on the baseball field, the football field. Business is business. Take care of business, and we're friends afterwards. And so we have the match, and we have just a great match. And all of a sudden, I used to. My finisher as a babyface was I would do the funk spinning toe hold into a figure four leg lock. And so I'm doing this spinning toe hold, and Dog kicks me in the rear end, and I take the big bump over the top rope to the floor. The referee starts to count me out, and Dog stops the count. He goes, I'm not going to win a match like this. And so he stops the count. He gets out on the floor, helps me off the floor, rolls me back in the ring, and as he's getting back in the ring, I load the glove for the very first time. And when he turns me around, I just one shot, and he fell like a brick. 1, 2, 3. I mean, they hated my guts. It was like, I'm just telling you, that's how brilliant Watts was, and that's how my journey as a heel started. And the infamous black glove, and then and then Duggan. Duggan and I were tag team partners. He was we had the Rat Pack. Me and Jim Duggan and Matt Bourne were the Rat Pack, and we did a thing where the state fair was going on, and we always taped our TV shows in this building that was on the fairgrounds in Shreveport where the state fair was happening. And so Bill Watts is saying, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the Irishman McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana, on the grounds of the state fair, and outside the state fair is going on right now. And hey, look, we at ringside we've got a gorilla from the state fair. He was giving away like helium balloons. So this gorilla is in the, and so half of the show, like 30 minutes into the show, 40 minutes into the show, the gorilla's patting kids on the head and giving them balloons. And then a Dog gets out there in a match with me, and something happens, and anyway, all of a sudden the gorilla attacks JYD and just starts stomping a mud hole in him, and he takes the top off, and it's Duggan. It was just, I don't know. That's how ingenious Watts was. He used everything, and so we had that run, and then of course, then Duggan turns babyface, and we had all kinds of matches. We had matches everywhere, but the ultimate Gimmick match. Now this was when Dundee was our booker, and it was like every Gimmick match you could think of in one. So when we had the first one it was the first show, the first time we did this match. We did it all over the territory, but the first time we did it was the big show in the Superdome in New Orleans. And we had done this thing where I had made the statement, about Duggan, looking like a pig, call yourself a champion, you look like a pig, and so really, so let's have a little contest and like the best dressed man. So we do this contest where we get on the TV show and we're both dressed in tuxedos, and the fans, according to their applause, decide who's the best dressed man, right? Of course, I'm the heel, and I lose, and so I go outside where the TV truck is, and I said that can't be true, and I've got a bat in my hand, and we just happen to be the TV truck happens to be parked by Duggan's car, and I go, oh, Duggan's car. So the camera had followed me out, so I just take the bat to Duggan's car and knock out his windshield and his headlights, and so the story goes on, and we have all these matches. So finally, the stipulation in this final blow-off match is we're dressed in tuxedos inside a steel cage, and there's a coal miner's glove attached to a 12-foot pole that's strapped to one of the corners. In other words, if you climb the pole and you get the coal miner's glove, it's loaded, and you can use it, and loser leave town. Every conceivable gimmick match there is in one match, and so that was the match that Duggan and I had, and of course, he wins the match, and I take off and I go to Japan for a month. So,
sure.
just had a lot of fun too.
Man, that's incredible stuff. We're talking wrestling's glory days here with $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase, back in the day, Mid-South Championship Wrestling. From one wrestling genius mind to another, from Bill Watts to Vince McMahon back in New York and WWF. You move up there shortly thereafter, of course. It's in your book. You tell a great story about how the $1 Million Man character all came about. And I know that time is valuable. So if you could just run us through for some of the listeners that haven't heard it yet or would like to hear it from the horse's mouth, tell us how that $1 Million Man character landed in your lap. When
I had gone to Japan. I'm in Japan, and Bruce Pritchard, who was with the WWF for a long time. He started out down in Houston. He actually grew up in Houston and worked for Paul Bosch when Houston was Paul Bosch's, and of course later Bill Watts would acquire Houston as a town. But anyway, Bruce and I developed a friendship, and so I was getting ready to go to Japan. I had gotten this tremendous opportunity because Bruiser Brody had jumped ship and left the All Japan Pro Wrestling and went to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and he and Stan Hansen had been the biggest tag team powerhouse in Japan ever had. And Stan had asked me. He said, hey, I need a new partner. Do you want to be the partner? And I said, boy, are you kidding? Let's do it. And so I was doing like 4, 5, 6 tours of Japan a year, and I was getting ready to go back on one of these tours. And Bruce Pritchard says, Ted, I hope you have a great trip. I'm going up to New York and interview to see about getting a job up there. And I just said, hey, you know what? Throw my name out there. I was up there in '79, and I talked to Pat briefly, when they came to Atlanta. And I knew that it wasn't the right time, but I said, just see if they're interested. So I'm in Japan, and he calls me. And while I'm in Japan, Bill Watts sells Mid-South to Jimmy Crockett, to Mid-Atlantic. And so I'm like, oh, my gosh. So Bruce calls me. He says, okay, Watts has sold out, because Watts saw the handwriting on the wall. He saw that it was too little too late. He tried the UWF, and it wasn't going to be able to overpower Vince McMahon and where Vince was going already. So Bruce says, whatever you do when you get back to Mid-South, do not sign a contract with Jimmy Crockett until you have an opportunity to talk to Vince, because he's definitely very interested. And so I got back, I get the phone call, and Vince flies me to New York, and he sits down, and he says, you know what, Ted? He says, so many things in our business have been done and redone and repackaged, he said, but, he says, I've got something I think is very original and that's never been done. He said, the one thing everybody hates is a guy who is filthy rich and by virtue of his wealth thinks he's better than everybody, looks down his nose at people, thinks he can buy anybody or buy anything. And I chuckled and said, I can't stand guys like that myself. And so he said, that's the essence of the character, this villain. And he said, we think you're the guy. He says, you're very articulate, you interview well, you're a great worker, blah, 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 blah. And he says, I think you're the guy. And he said, in an effort to market this character, we're going to try to make the public believe that you're really rich. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? And he said, well, we're going to send you everywhere first class. You're going to have every time you fly, it's first class. Every time you get off a plane, it's a limousine from the airport to the hotel to the Coliseum back to the hotel back to the airport. Whenever the public sees you, they are going to see the appearance of wealth. And obviously, you won't be staying at the Red Roof Inn anymore, So then this guy walks out and counts out, $2,000 in brand new $100 bills, and he says, "This is your flash cash." And he said, "You know how mad people get when you buy a newspaper and pay for it with a $100 bill?" I go, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Do it." He says, "Now you got to pick your spot, but go into a restaurant. Say you're having breakfast in a diner or somewhere, or even at a hotel, and just get up and announce yourself and say, you know what, my name's Ted Dibiase. I'm the $1 Million Man of the WWF, and just to prove to all you people that I'm not really a bad guy, I'm buying your breakfast, and go around and pick up all the checks. Pay for it with them $100 bills. Bring me the receipt. You give me the receipt. I replenish the cash." Wow. I mean, it's like, pinch me. Is it really happening? Are you kidding? And of course he said as well. He says, "Now abuse it and you'll lose it." And I never did really abuse that. So, but that was the beginning. And then the vignettes, all those vignettes that we did. The people hated my guts before they ever saw me wrestle, because of the vignette with me at the pool, kick the kids out of the pool and pay off the guy, and getting a paper cut and going to a hospital, and and the girl says, "You're going to have to wait," and I keep throwing down the $100 bills, and she takes me right in, and I kick in the honeymoon couple out of the honeymoon suite because I want the best room in the hotel. All that stuff was just classic, build up for me coming on the scene. And I remember Dave Meltzer at the time. Dave has always been kind to me and spoken highly of me and my, Ted Dibiase is such a great technical wrestler. He was kind of like, why would a guy with your wrestling ability go to the WWF? Because he really, because I said the same thing that all those other guys were saying at first. When I first started watching the show and all the cartoon stuff, I said, Vince is killing the business. But it was a stroke of genius because, the biggest marks, I guess, were us because, we understood that educated people that ever been in a real fight or ever been in a real athletic, contest can watch wrestling for 10 minutes and kind of figure it out. It's just like, but you never know. You never know for sure. And if you got two guys in there that are really good, they can really make it look real. So, but anyway, I remember telling Meltzer, I said, "Dave, I'm in this business to make a living. And I said, if I'm going to continue to make a living, this is the only place to go because this place is taken over. And of course, the rest is history. And, it was an incredible run. I had a lot of fun. Oh my gosh, the match between Andre and Hogan at Market Square Arena, the setup for WrestleMania 4, the twin referees was just one of the greatest angles I think I've ever been a part of. And I can still see Hogan. I can still see his face looking into the camera, and he's got both the Hebner brothers by the collar. And he pulls one in and looks at him, and he pushes him back, and he pulls the other one in and looks at him, and then he looks into the camera with this look on his face like, classic. And I don't know. People say, what was your favorite WrestleMania? And that was probably, WrestleMania 4 was probably because it was my first, because it really set in motion, the rest of my run as that character. And plus, I had a great match with Savage. And then the second most would be my match at WrestleMania 6 with Jake Roberts in Canada, in Toronto. Of course, wrestling at Wembley Stadium in front of 80,000 people was a pretty big thrill too. That's the largest crowd that I ever wrestled in front of. That was funny. We were tag team champions, me and Rotundo, and we're wrestling, the Legion of Doom, Hawk and Animal, and the World Tag Team title match goes on first. You know why? Because Hawk had taken a pill, and we went to Vince and said, look, if you don't get us out there soon, if we wait till when we're supposed to go on, he'll be asleep, and we won't be able to wake him up. And so we went on first.
Oh, boy.
Crazy stuff.
That's incredible stuff there, and some great excerpts from the career of the $1 Million Man. I wanted to ask you one real quick question, send you back over to the Scum here. You were talking about some of those fantastic vignettes and the spots up in the crowd at the time. They had the podium that was offset from the actual ring, and you were up there with your sidekick Virgil, fan of the money, and you had so many different spots where you had fans come up and you're kicking the basketball out, and I know there's a story out there about you running into that guy that turned into about a 6'5" monster one time. He found you in a parking lot.
Unbelievable, yeah, true story. Because of all the stunts we did, the one that people ask me about the most is that one. And it's like every time I turn around, somebody says, did you really do that to that little kid? And I said, of course not. I said, it's show business. I said, this was television, and it was rehearsed. And yes, and the family, they got the money, but, I said, when we rehearsed it. When we did it live, I had to be in character and hardcore, and this kid was only 5 years old, maybe 6. And so when I looked at him and I said, you're going to have to learn a hard lesson at a very young age. When you don't get the job done, you don't get the money. Big crocodile tears welled up in his eyes, and he just ran to his mother, just bawling. He couldn't have done it any better. Well, I got in the back, and everybody's going, that was awesome. And I'm going, well, I'm glad you guys liked it, but I hope you got an armored vehicle to get me out of the building now. People just wanted to kill me. And so I always heard about that. And so I just started saying, I said, and of course, this is 20 years later. I said, look, that kid was 5 then. He's 25, 26 years old now. And I said, what's probably going to happen is I'll be walking through an airport, and, some guy will tap me on the shoulder. I'll turn around. He'll be 6'6", and he's going to look down at me and go, hey, you remember the kid in the basketball? Now, I said it jokingly. So a couple of years ago, I flew into Omaha, Nebraska, where my dad was from, and we had our house when I was a kid growing up. And I was going there for a speaking engagement, and I rented a car, and I walked out to get the car. And it was one of the rental agency where you pick whatever car you want. So I'm trying to find a car, and this guy comes up, taps me on the shoulder. I turn around, and I look up at him, and he is about 6'6". This guy's a monster. And he said, Mr. Dibiase, he said, I'm the general manager here. He says, I'll help you find a car if you like. And, oh, by the way, he said, you remember the thing you did with that kid in the basketball? And I looked at him and I went, no. He just got the biggest grin on his face, and he said, yep, it was me. I almost had a cow. I was like, you don't understand. I've been telling people as a joke that I was going to run into you one day and that you'd be 6'6", and he was. Then I asked him. I said, "So, what have you been doing with yourself?" And he said, "You're going to really love this." He said, "I went to college on a basketball scholarship." And I said, "Were you any good?" And he said, "Well, I was good enough to get drafted by the Lakers, and but unfortunately," he said, "I didn't make the last cut." But I just thought that was just incredible. And I still got a picture of it. You know, it's unbelievable.
that is unbelievable stuff. But about that, it might not have been a bad move to pick out and fan some of those hundreds.
Yeah.
Right. Well, just putting it out there. Not sure if you're still in that line of business, but for the record, I definitely have a price.
Everybody does.
That's right. Anyhow, moving along. Not too long after you started in WWF, after the vignettes, classic stuff, the promos, you were thrust right into the world title picture, like you were talking about the main event on NBC with Andre and Hulk and the twin referee angle. You actually paid for the services and storyline of Andre.
Right.
Much like some of the other names we noted earlier, maybe more so than anyone ever. It seems like everyone has a great story or memories of their time with Andre. And being that you work so closely with him, was just wondering, what was it like to travel and work with such a legend and such a huge persona? And are there any particular stories that stick out in your memory that you might want to share about your time with the Giant?
Well, Andre was he was a great guy. You know, he was a real good judge of character too. I mean, you know, either liked you or you didn't, and you knew whether he did or he didn't. But you know, and he was great. I mean, Andre could work. I mean, here's a guy 7 feet 4 inches tall and could have a match with the guy, you know, and actually make people believe that guy had a chance. And but when I was traveling with Andre, and I actually met Andre when I was in college. You know, when I was still playing football at West Texas, and he came and wrestled in Amarillo, and I took him out to have a couple of beers afterwards. It was funny. The first time I ever sat down in a bar with him, it was one of the college bars where all the kids went. And the girl comes up and says, "What do you have?" And he goes, "Do you have a big trash can?" And she says, "We've got a lot of them." She said, "Why?" He says, "I want you to empty one." He said, "I want you to fill it with beer and ice and bring it back to the table." And she looked over at me like, "Is he serious?" And I said, "Yeah, do it." And so that was my first night out ever with Andre, and that was in college. So, but traveling with him was great. You know, it's. But the funniest story is. We were going to Japan. It's a 14-hour flight from Atlanta or New York or just about anywhere, Dallas to Japan. 14 hours over there. That's a long time on a plane. And you know, Andre's sitting in first class. But I mean, Andre sitting in first class is like me sitting in coach now. It's like, you know, you're jammed in the seat. You're not comfortable. And so we get off the plane, and now it's another hour into the city. Check into the hotel, and we drop our bags, and we're going to go get something to eat. And so I push the button on the elevator. The door opens. There's Andre. "Hi, boss. Let's go eat." And so as it starts down, it seems like this elevator stops on every floor, and people just keep getting on. You know, Japan's a very small country with a whole lot of people, so what you and I would consider is a full elevator, not over there. And one thing about the Giant is he doesn't like to be crowded, and he's just been on a 14-hour flight, crammed in a little seat in a plane, and now he's in a Japanese hotel in a room that is, you know, by our standard normal, by his standard not. And now he's on an elevator, and people keep getting on. He reaches over and he taps me on the shoulder or on the leg, and I glanced up at him, and he winked at me and smiled. And I said, "Okay, something's going to happen." And I'm looking straight ahead, and all of a sudden, the Giant cuts the loudest, longest fart I believe I've ever heard in my life. And I mean, it's like I remember standing there thinking, when is it going to end? You know, it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, you know, it was just like it just kept going. And all I could picture is the poor guy that's standing directly behind him, which obviously the Japanese are like about 5 feet tall. So this guy's right at butt level, and he's getting it full force. And all I can tell you is this, is when the elevator stopped and the doors opened, those people couldn't get off of that elevator fast enough. It was like the Exodus, and all you could hear was the giant going, oh, 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 oh. Oh gosh! I mean, I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. Yeah, I mean, you had to really be there to appreciate it, but it was a classic Andre moment.
It sounds like great stuff. That is fantastic. Again, like I was saying, it seems like anyone who worked closely with him has some classic tales, and those certainly fit the bill. We appreciate you sharing those with us.
Yeah.
So along the way, while you were affiliated working with Andre, at least for a short period of time, you did actually gain possession, purchasing the title from Andre to become WWF champion. That led to the tournament, like you said, at WrestleMania 4. You and Savage wound up in the finals. Great match there. Again, like earlier, Steve, or when you touched on the question, when you answered Steve's question there, you were saying the NWA title, it was tossed around that you were, possibly going to be named champion at one point. I always wondered when after the main event heading into WrestleMania 4. Now, was it always the plan that you would purchase the title and it would become vacant, or was there a chance or a thought process there that the $1 Million Man would run with the title for a little while, or at all that you would be WWF champion?
Well, the show where with the twin referees at Market Square Arena, the setup for WrestleMania 4 was exactly what it was supposed to be, meaning that I actually, because Andre puts the belt around my waist, basically, signifying that he had sold it to me, and I actually wore the belt for about a week or 2 weeks, and then of course, they come out with the Jack Tunney announcement, Dibiase, you can't have the belt, and Andre won't take it back because technically, even though it was controversial, Andre was technically the champion, and he won't take it back because I had paid for it, and so they vacate the title, and that was the whole idea, was to set up WrestleMania 4. Now, originally, the thought was that I would, in some underhanded way, win WrestleMania 4. And I think there were, a couple of things. One thing, and of course I wasn't aware of it at the time, but Honky Tonk Man was the Intercontinental Champion, and for whatever reason, he didn't want to drop the belt to Randy Savage, which I think was originally what they had thought about doing there. And I remember Pat Patterson came to me and he asked me this question. He said, Ted, what would put more heat on you? He said, if we do what we normally do, it's like you're building this, you're as the heel, and in some underhand way, you get the title and you have the run with Hogan. Of course, then you drop the title and then he goes in with somebody else, or you don't win the title at WrestleMania, and eventually you create your own belt. In other words, I don't need your title, and I am going to create my own title, and I'm going to defend it, so every night. So I just said that's the ticket, and so the whole thing with the $1 Million belt, even though it didn't show up for some time, because Andre and I then went out and we went all over the country. We had matches with Hogan and Savage and Hogan and any one of a number of different people. But when they created the $1 Million belt, I made more money with that belt than I ever would have made otherwise. And it's like people. I go and I do these autograph shows. I mean, it's just crazy. They want to take a picture with me and the belt. Of course, I don't have the belt. I have a replica. But because the actual belt that they actually had made is a $40,000 belt. Of course, it's probably worth more now. All the stones in the actual belt were cubic zirconium, which aren't cheap, and the guy that designed the belt and put it together is from a real, like a world-renowned gemologist and Betteridge jewelry store in Greenwich, Connecticut. So a high dollar operation, and so they didn't leave me with the actual belt. But yes, to answer your question, originally the thought was for me to win at WrestleMania 4, and then, but they never really told me about the thing with Savage and Honky Tonk Man. But when Patterson posed that question to me, I said that makes more sense. It kind of like people say, well, don't you wish you'd have been the world champion at some point in time? And, aren't you disappointed? And I said, well, obviously you could say, yeah, it would have been great to be world champion. But let's remember what we're talking about here. Wrestling is show business. It's a work. And so you're not really the world champion. I mean, it's like, I was a main event guy. I was a top guy. Wrestling titles in our business are props. And today, at least back then, they meant something. Today, they have title matches every week, and the title matches don't mean anything. The belts, in my opinion, don't mean anything today. Because, it used to be when the world champion came to town, it was a special deal, that you were going to see a world championship match. But now it's like, they have matches every week. World champion this, that, world champion that. So, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head there, where the titles seem to be a lot less, more devalued, I guess you would say, in today's marketplace than it was back when you were going strong as the $1 Million Man. But I will tell you this: a couple of things that you had mentioned about WrestleMania. I thought for sure as a young man watching that you were winning that title. It was actually a surprise to me to see that Randy Savage walked away from the arena that night as the champion. I thought for sure with all of the focus they had on that angle with you that you were walking out of there the champion that night. But that $1 Million belt is got to be one of the most unique pieces of wrestling memorabilia to ever come across anybody's television screen. So certainly, like you said, putting aside the fact that you were considered to be not only the NWA world champion, but the WWF world champion in the heart of when, wrestling was huge back in the 80s, that's certainly something to be said right there. But, we wanted to talk a little bit while we had you on the line here, Ted, WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. We got Ted Dibiase with us, and we would not be doing our jobs if we didn't talk about a couple of some of the great tag team partners that you had throughout the course of your career. You had three specific ones I wanted to talk about here. Of course, the legendary Dr. Death Steve Williams, Stan the Lariat Hansen, and, a Syracuse guy, both myself and the Scum from upstate New York, so big fans of IRS, Mike Rotundo. Of course, he's got some kids going on, Bray Wyatt and Bo Dallas, both is still active in the WWE now. So compare and contrast, if you could, working with each of these partners, and is there a favorite out of the three, and for whatever reason, and could you tell us, who that would be and why?
Well, it'd be hard to pick one of those guys because I had success with all of them, but Steve Williams basically came right out of college and playing football and wrestling for the University of Oklahoma. And Bill Watts basically gave him to me and said grooming. Basically, I had matches with Steve, and I teamed with Steve eventually. And actually, after I turned to babyface again, after the match that anybody could see on the best of thing that the WWE's just put out about Mid-South Wrestling, the match I had with Flair on TV where I bled so bad was my turning babyface, and shortly after that, it was Watts teamed me and Steve Williams up, and we had a great run. And Steve was a wonderful guy, and had a lot of charisma, and initially, and he made up for his lack of actually ring knowledge and what have you. With his charisma, but he, as he went on, he got much better. But I would say Steve's strength was his look and his charisma, and his just incredibly strong, and and again loved him, and was just I was one of the guys that went to Colorado and spoke at his funeral. Love the guy. Stan Hansen. I've known Stan Hansen since. When I was a recruit at West Texas State, he was there as a student assistant, and his just finishing up his career, his degree. And I saw him have his first match in the Amarillo Sports Arena. So I've known Stan, and I've known him all the way back to when he first got in the business. But, he and I, became close, over the years. And then obviously when he asked me to be his tag team partner in Japan, it was just a very unique opportunity. And, as short-lived as it was, that was a great run. It was awesome. And, he's, and again, Stan is not a, he is not a, it's kind of like, boy, what an odd pair, because Stan's like this freight train. It's like you got to get out of his way, and but just so much energy and so much charisma, and just go, and just he knew the psychology of the business in Japan better than anybody, and so I always followed his lead, and he was just phenomenal. And I can't say enough about Mike Rotunda. Mike and I are still very good friends, and when they teamed us up, I mean, and again, Mike understands psychology of the business, and we were good. I would say that in terms of technical wrestling, and in terms of the way that heels and tag teams get heat and work together and what have you, that was probably the best tag team in terms of the technical skill of having the match. I mean, we had the belts 3 different times. We got them, we lost them, we got them back, we lost them, we got them back a third time, and it was a great run. And and again, even to this day, my youngest son Brett, who was in the developmental program for a while until he had 4 knee surgeries and a neck fusion, but he's still very good friends with the Rotunda boys, and so he's one of the guys that I try to stay in touch with.
That's fantastic stuff. And, certainly if you're watching today's product, there is flavoring of, Mike Rotunda and Money Inc. What a great tag team that was, like you were mentioning. Again, just bringing back some moments in time from myself and the Scum being kids watching some of these great tag teams. Money Inc. certainly right in the heart of a really, really strong tag team division at the time. But we'll move on a little bit here. And before you head off, and move on to the greener pastures, before you leave the WWF, you have the opportunity to manage Steve Austin as he arrives into the company. And this is not the first time that a piece of talent that, you would rise to iconic status. Clearly, as you just mentioned with Dr. Death Steve Williams, and they get under your wing, and the next thing you know, they're superstars. So, the Undertaker, again, another guy back in 1990, a mystery team member at the Survivor Series. Could you give us your memories on what you were thinking both with Steve Austin and The Undertaker as you see these guys develop into what we know now as legends, but certainly guys that were young and made their debuts with the WWF, both working with you?
Well, Undertaker, I introduced him the very first night that people ever saw him, and I watched him, I just watched him grow. I mean, Mark took a very unusual gimmick, and he just did it tremendous. I mean, to work like that and to move slow like that, and yet have a match and get over, that takes some skill, and he did it, and he was great. And and to this day, I mean, it's like and he had that longevity, and of course he rebranded himself a couple of times, but he obviously. He kept coming back to what made him great, which was the character of The Undertaker. Steve Austin, I was out of the ring by the time Steve came along, and basically it's another thing, like obviously Vince wanted me to help Steve in any way I could, and I remember one of the things I told Steve was, I think some of the agents were giving him, they were telling him, say, look, you need to do more. You're not doing enough. Kind of like there's not enough. Enough action in your matches or whatever. And I don't know. I remember. All I remember is I told him this. I said that's not true. I said, here's what it is. I said, you have a very believable look. You have a very believable style. and a great ring presence. And I said, you keep doing what you're doing. I said, because it's believable. And I said, it's going to take you a little bit longer to get over. I said, but once you're over, you're over. And then once you're over, you can do whatever you want to do. And of course, I didn't even, no one had any idea that, that he would become the star that he did. I mean, Steve Austin came along and surpassed Hogan, and he listened to what I said, and the rest is history. But it was a joy to have time with him and to work with him, and those guys are. That's just it. In my opinion, that's like the one thing today that's really, it's like, and again, I'm not taking anything away from John Cena. Cena is a great guy. He's a consummate pro. He's one of the hardest working guys I've ever seen. And it's like, it's every good run has its run, and I think it's run its course. I mean, in terms of he's been there for so long, but it's like, what are they going to replace him with? And it's like, where is that next just really big, bigger than life superstar? And because you had Hogan, then you got Austin, then you got The Rock. You got Shawn Michaels. It's like, where is that next star? And so I that's the question today. It's like that I'm asking. It's like, who's it going to be? And I don't know. Maybe you're asking the same question.
Well, a valid question for sure. It doesn't seem like anyone right now is that guy, like you were just saying. I would have to agree with you there. So we just have a couple more questions for you here, Ted. We really appreciate you coming on and taking this time out of your schedule to be with us, going back, reliving your fantastic career in professional wrestling. We can't thank you enough. I'm going to move along now to when you parted ways with the WWF. Somewhere around 1996, the Monday Night Wars are in full swing, and you wind up working for Eric Bischoff in WCW. You brought him first with the NWO, and then you spent a brief time there managing the Steiners and Ray Traylor. How were you approached? How did it first come about, your move down to WCW, and what was the deciding factor that brought you in there initially? And looking back, how would you sum up the experience there? We've had a lot of people on, and there's a mixed reaction there to the atmosphere of what was going on there. And I guess in summing that up, what would you say were the major differences between your time with WWF and then your time with WCW?
Well, the major difference between WWF and WCW is that the WWF was a well-tuned, well-oiled machine that was run very well and by Vince McMahon, who had his thumb on the button all the time and knew what he was doing. I couldn't say that for WCW. It was probably I'm sorry, but the worst organization the time that I was there that I had ever worked for, in terms of, it was kind of like, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. There were times we'd go on the live show and they didn't even know what they were going to do in the last segment yet. But how I ended up there. I mean, when I went back to work for the WWF after I stopped wrestling physically in '93, I went back as a manager commentator, and I was fine with that. It didn't demand me being on the road a lot, and the other thing that had happened in my life is that I had come to a place where I nearly lost my family because of stupid things I was doing, stupid choices I had made in my life. And most fans know now that I'm a minister now, and this was at a place in a time of my life when I was like putting my life back together, and I came to understand that there was no amount of money that I could make that was worth being away from my family all the time. Which is a decision that my son just recently made. And it's like, I didn't want my boys to wrestle, not because I didn't love wrestling, but because of the lifestyle, because of the unbelievable demand on that it takes from you, in terms of being away from family. And so my decision to leave WWF had nothing to do with me being unhappy with them as a business. It had everything to do with Vince deciding to put me back on the road. He put me back on the road initially with Sid Vicious, and of course then I ended up with Steve Austin. And anyway, as the wrestling wars began and everything, it came to my attention that I could go to WCW and I could be on a very handsome guaranteed contract for 3 years, and I could do what I had been doing, and that's I would show up every Monday, and I would show up for the pay-per-views, and not have to be on the road all the time, and that was why I made the move. But once I got there, it was just it was so poorly run. I can remember Eric Bischoff saying he was going to run Vince out of business. I laughed in his face. I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "That'll never happen." I said, he might, if he withdraws at all, he might withdraw back to his territory, but I don't see that happening. And I just understood. Vince been around this his whole life, and Eric Bischoff, the whole NWO, Eric Bischoff takes credit for the NWO angle, and that it's not his. It had been done in Japan already, so it wasn't original. And Eric Bischoff didn't create any new stars. What's funny is that what the WCW did was they bought the stars that Vince McMahon created, and then Vince McMahon created new stars. And so I guess for the exception of I'm brain dead.
Goldberg,
yeah. And so of course Goldberg was, not really that. I mean, he was a hot commodity at that time. Sting, obviously Sting's a good worker. And of course Flair was there too, but Flair came over to WWF. So WCW just, those years were just, that was one contract I was glad to see come to an end.
Sure. It's it's not smooth sailing when you have a big guaranteed contract and you're glad to see it come to an end, right?
Yeah. It's just, it was just poor management, very poor management.
Yeah. Well, again, that's not an uncommon opinion that we've heard with some of the other people that we've spoken with, but moving through your career, it's a point that we wanted to touch on here. And last question that we had for you, Ted, I think you could tell just with the questions that we came at you with here today, both Steve and myself have been longtime fans of yours, dating back to the Mid-South and the Georgia Championship Wrestling, right up through what I personally feel is, and I don't think a lot of people would argue, maybe the best heel character of all time in the $1 Million Man Gimmick. The finish off, we just wanted to talk about when you were finally recognized amongst your peers and taking your rightful place in the WWE Hall of Fame, what that meant to you. Take us through that whole process, how you were contacted about it, and just what that meant to you in general to be inducted.
Well, they contact most of the guys for that, pretty far out, let them know that they've been selected, and I mean, it is very special, and some people say, well, the WWE Hall of Fame is kind of like, it's more like Vince's Hall of Fame, but I mean, the selection criteria, I mean, it's not ultimately Vince. I mean, there's a lot of people who have input, but to be selected for the Hall of Fame, and that's what it is. It's being recognized by your peers, and it's very special. And then when you look at some of the people, when I look at some of the people that are in there and that went in ahead of me, people that I looked up to and admired very much, and to know that I've been put in a category with them is pretty humbling. But the way I'm telling you, the way the WWE does it, it's very classy. I mean, my wife and I were flown out there for WrestleMania, first class, the whole first class deal again, and everything paid for, and it was a very special moment, and a lot of guys have asked different people. I asked my boys to induct me. If it hadn't been my boys, I probably would have asked Terry Funk. But it was kind of like a toss-up. I didn't know whether to ask Terry Funk or Harley Race. But so I asked my boys to do it, and they did a good job. Very special moment. And of course, Vince is he's a man who wants to make money, and it's like now he's, you think about that. He fills that building, the Hall of Fame. I mean, the fans. I mean, they sell out a building, a Coliseum, for a Hall of Fame show, and then the next night, they fill a stadium, with people for WrestleMania. So it's just unbelievable, the marketing job that Vince has done. But to think back about it, it was very special in that, and Vince kind of, he says, I want you to, it's your moment, say what you want to say. And of course, now the reason that they don't have a live show anymore is that for that reason, because they have to edit so much of that stuff, and the show can go on forever. But of course, with me, and at the end of my deal, the climax was, he wanted me to, do the deal with the money one more time, and so that was just a classic ending for me to, come to the very end of that speech and all that stuff, and then tell the people one more time, if you think you can't be bought, and then they did the money drop. They dropped $10,000 out of the ceiling at that show, and it was funny because when I walked back through the curtain, Vince looked at me and he had a big smile on his face, and he says, "Well, kid, as always, tremendous job." And he said, "But you're still costing me a lot of money."
That's good stuff. Very deserving honor. One of the all-time greats. We appreciate you coming on here with us, the WGD Weekly, taking the time to answer all our questions here. Like I said earlier, if you do get back in that game, my offer still stands. I certainly do have a price.
Absolutely. And I don't know if there's an actual phrase for this, but it seems to me from our experiences so far, myself and the Scum, that you may have been one of the best heels of all time, but outside of the ring, one of the greatest guys we've had a chance to, sit down and have an interview with. So we wanted to thank you on behalf of, myself and the Scum and all of Scum Nation out there listening. We wanted to say thank you to everybody. $milliondollarman.com is your website. Is there anything else going on in the world of Ted Dibiase you wanted to let everybody know about?
Well, $milliondollarman.com is one of the websites. The other one is heartofdavidministry.com, and then my Twitter handle is MDM Ted Dibiase. So you can follow me on Twitter as well. But I would just end by just letting the fans know that without the fans, you guys and I wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think wrestling fans are some of the greatest fans in the world because they're just so loyal. When they're with you for life. And I run into people all the time that can tell me more about my career than I can remember, and it just amazes me. But I just want to, say that, I'm one of those guys that's grateful for that. I enjoyed the run. I enjoyed entertaining people, and I look forward to the times when I get to go back and do the autograph signings, especially ones where I can actually be there for, instead of like 2 hours and I'm out the door because of time. Like the Comic-Cons, I can, hang. They've asked me. They said, how long do you want to sign? I go, I want to be there all day. And they look at me and they go, what? I said, yeah, I want to be there all day. And of course, I said, I'm going to take a break here and there, but I want to be there all day because I have the opportunity then. The people can come up and actually I can interact with them and talk with them, and it tells me a lot about the business and what they liked and what they didn't like and what they like now and what they don't like. And, you know, I enjoy that. I enjoy that interaction. So, you know, some things are priceless, and the fans that stick with you is a priceless commodity. So thank you very much.
No, it was our pleasure. Thanks so much for being on the show with us, Ted. Scum, any last words you want to get? And I know, and see, now the Scum, he'll never tell you this because he's a proud man, and he's not one of those crazy maniacs that's going to tell you how big of a fan he is. But I grew up with the Scum, and we've been watching wrestling for 25, 30 years together. He is one of your biggest fans, hands down, no questions asked. So I wanted to say that to you, Ted, because I know the Scum has an aura about him, and he's got his his Scum eyes he doesn't want to look bad in front of. But I will tell you personally how huge of a fan and how much he's been looking forward to this tonight. So I'm so glad that we were able to spend this time together. It's been a crazy night. Thanks so much for being here once again, Ted. It's awesome.
Well, again, I appreciate it very, very, very much, and I guess the best way for me to end is to remind everybody that everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
Oh, how great was that? The $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase, just joined us. A good 90-minute interview with him. Scum, I know you're going nuts right now.
Well, everybody's got a price indeed. Years later, still buying, paying for people kissing the man's feet, all the kids get out of the pool area. I think I might try those tactics this summer coming up, Steve. What do you think?
Hey, whatever works, as long as you don't kick somebody in the face when you're trying to kick a basketball out from underneath them. And make sure you bring some sort of a bodyguard fanning $100 bills.
Yeah, you never know when that one's going to come back to bite you in the ass. It's like Shaq O'Neal shows up right in a car in Nebraska.
I think I'd rather have that happen than be stuck in an elevator with Andre the Giant and a bad case of gas.
Yeah, that sounds like a serious issue. I'm picturing that kamikaze run, so to speak, out of the elevator by all of those people, kind of like the old Godzilla movies.
All of them screaming bonsai, I'm sure.
Absolutely. All of them screaming bonsai, and all of them doing that spin around forearm followed by the shining wizard.
I'll tell you what, Scum, you're something else. But you touch on a point when you're talking about some of the Japanese stuff. I mean, Ted Dibiase made his mark over there, too. He's been all over the world. He's worked for every great promotion, the Crockett's, Mid-South, of course, WWF. Everywhere the guy's went, he's had some great success, and there's reasons why for that. Now, change the subject just a little bit, and I'm not much of a WWE pitch guy, but I'll tell you that new DVD they came out with focusing on Mid-South wrestling is awesome. I had a chance to get it about a week or so back. It's excellent. I haven't had a chance to watch it all the way, but I'm telling you this, just on the first disc, they talked the Wrestling 2 angle with Magnum TA. Both guys, I've loved both of those guys since I was a kid. Let's talk about a 6-man tag match, just random match on there. Andre the Giant and Dusty Rhodes and JYD versus the Wild Samoans and the Big Cat Ernie Ladd. That ends up an absolute Donnybrook. Won't give too much away, but you definitely want to watch that. You want to watch Kamala get involved in a match with Andre the Giant and body slam him. That was great. It's good to see WWE actually put that on there. And another thing that I really liked about the DVD was the production was pretty cool. It actually had a little bit more flow to it. It was a little bit more documentary style where you had a story being told and then they went to a match and then a story and a match, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a little bit more interesting when it came to listening to some of the individuals that were on there, like Ted Dibiase, who they focus about the first 15 minutes solely on him. So it's really good to hear that. A little bit about JYD, of course, a huge name down there. So pick that DVD up. If you're a DVD collector, it's definitely worth your time. If you're a casual collector or you're real frugal about which DVDs you want to buy, take my word for it. Myself and the Scum, we grew up north. We didn't get a chance to watch a lot of Mid-South wrestling. So if you're in our position and never really had a chance to watch that on a weekly basis, kind of like we had the ability to watch AWA and Georgia Championship Wrestling along with all the Northeastern product that Vince McMahon gave us, so pick that up. That is a very good DVD set to have. I can't wait to watch the rest of it. It's really good stuff, Scum.
Sure. Yeah, and I believe on that Mid-South DVD, I haven't gotten all the way through it, Steve, but I've seen at least part of it. Many of the things that Ted Dibiase touched on, some of those classic moments that he recalled on the interview today, are featured on there. You know, some of the stuff with him and Hacksaw Duggan and, you know, their whole angle, the Rat Pack, I believe, is featured on there as well. So a lot of good stuff there. I would agree with you, too, on that documentary format. I'm a big fan of when they do those releases and they do the documentary. But like you said, it's nice to have, all right, here's the backstory, and then here's the match, rather than a third disc that piles all the matches on. You know, by the time you're done watching it, not that that's, you know, you still get what you're paying for, but it's nice to have them kind of in chronological order there. It's a good thing. Another territory that Ted Dibiase was a big part of, I'd love to see him. I was never really privy to the fact that they owned all of the footage from that area, but recently another one of our admins that has been a friend of the show for sure, helping out with some stuff, is Dan from over at Wrestling's Glory Days, had mentioned this past week in chatting that WWE owns the footage to Georgia Championship Wrestling. Now, obviously, I figured they would with buying the WCW library, but, man, I'd love to see a documentary of that and that whole run, that great run down in Atlanta and the old TBS studios and the matches from the Omni and all over the place with that area. I'm sure Ted Dibiase would be featured heavily in that, his run with the national title down there, his feud that I earlier brought up, one of the first feuds that I really latched onto as a fan, as a youngster, was him and Wildfire Tommy Rich, when Rich lost the Loser Leave Town after they split of a brief team that they were, and DiBiase turned heel and was a vicious, hated rule breaker, and then they kind of pulled one over on him with the classic masked man, the blonde hair coming out of the back, you know it's Tommy Rich. Always a sucker for the old, oh, who is that, when you totally know who it is under the mask, whether it was Stagger Lee or our guest last week, the Boogie Woogie Man, and Charlie Brown. Hogan did the Mr. America thing. You know, Andre was the Machine when he got suspended from the WWE, WWF way back when. Always a big fan of that. So if you're listening, anyone up there in Connecticut, how about giving us some Georgia Championship Wrestling? Keep the hits coming and keep DiBiase on the tube.
Oh, yeah, totally, man. Who doesn't want to have more loaded glove? I'd say the loaded glove's a little bit better of a deal than the loaded boot, a la the Iron Sheik.
Yeah, you can always sneak the glove on, I think, a little quicker, or even get away with just wearing it. Maybe if you wear a pair of them Hollywood style, you know, I don't necessarily remember him ever loading the glove necessarily when he used to rock the fingerless black gloves back in the NWO era. But I think you can get away with that and still be quote-unquote cool, I guess. How do they say it? Too sweet. Getting back to the $1 Million Man, though, today, Steve. Again, that's one thing that always, with me, was just proves his staying power and proves what a superstar he was and what a talent and what charisma that he had. I mean, think about way back when it first came, and he even said himself at one point, I believe he said it was a conversation he had when he was going to become the $1 Million Man and head to New York. I think he said he had a conversation with Dave Meltzer where they, he at the time had kind of agreed with the look that, Vince is ruining the business. Vince is all these characters and the cartoon and the entertainment, sports entertainment angles. But look at Ted Dibiase from where he started. Second generation guy, comes in with the Funks back in Amarillo. He, up in Kansas City, the Missouri State Championship, which he agreed with you when you made the point of how important and how prestigious of a title that was, and that it usually led to an NWA World title run down the road. I mean, he was your classic textbook 60-minute guy in the ring putting on a clinic. And then all of a sudden he goes and he shifts gears from the babyface good guy to where he's a great, believable, hated, vicious rule breaker. And then he goes up north, not to mention a stopover in Japan with Stan Hansen. That style he fits into, and he's over as hell. Then he heads up north. He's the $1 Million Man. His wrestling career comes to an end. He's a great manager, built a great stable of people in the WWF. He had Bundy and Bigelow and Sid, and Tatanka jumped ship and went over there, and he had Nikolai Volkov wearing the shirt with the cents sign instead of the dollar sign there, the $1 Million Corporation or whatever they called it. did some announcing, was good there. And then not only that, he jumps over into WCW, and he's the mouthpiece for a bit, one of the first guys that joined the NWO. I mean, think about the generations there that are bridged in all those things. He was believable, he fit in, and he was just one of the greatest talents of all time.
You know, it's hard to not argue that Ted Dibiase is one of the best guys of all time by his peers, like he mentioned in the interview. You know, get elected to the Hall of Fame. That was certainly an honor. One of the best heels in my estimation, one of the best heels of all time, easily in the top 10. I know Scum probably in your top 3 maybe of all time. You know, while I got you here, my friend, I thought I would give you the accountability of letting our listeners know who our next round of guests are going to be.
Yeah, a couple of huge names. Spoiler alert, Steve. I know we stick away from the spoilers here, but very near future, we got what myself and my good friend Steve have been referring to behind the curtain, so to speak, as our accountability run. And anyone who's been anywhere near a computer in the last, 12, 14 months that's a fan of pro wrestling would equate that with a couple of names. Another one that will rank right up there with Ted DiBiase is a favorite of myself and yours, long time, every step along the way. Probably has a big part in that DVD that you were talking about in the Mid-South. If I'm not mistaken, he picked up a knee lift from an old favorite of yours up there. And that's Jake the Snake Roberts is going to be joining us in the near future, Steve. And then following that, if Jake the Snake Roberts is involved with the accountability run, who else but Diamond Dallas Page is going to be with us for a 2-parter. And here's the kicker on Dallas Page is that we're going to have a special giveaway during the shows that Dallas is on, where a lucky listener here at WGD Weekly is going to be the recipient of a full set of DDP Yoga DVDs autographed by Dallas Page himself. Pretty generous of DDP to do that. Great guy, doing great things with Jake, doing great things with Scott Hall. Everybody knows all about it. Where else would they want to be when they want to get the word out, when they want to reach the maximum audience, than with the latest sensation that's sweeping the internet wrestling and the wrestling radio nation, baby?
Oh, boy. Yeah, man, you're absolutely right. DDP Yoga, $100 value, signed by him. That's a great deal. Look forward to that. It's going to be a great giveaway. Just like our old guests, Kevin Hunsberger and Arlene Wilson, they won their gifts from Steven the Scum. They were happy campers. We'll get another happy camper out there, too, very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening. We're going to see you next week with our special guest. Until then, on behalf of the Scum, my name's Steve. I'll see you then.
You won't want to miss next week. Trust me.